Welcome to Thriving Your Love, a podcast where we will guide and help you improve your most precious relationships in life. This podcast is produced and hosted by certified emotionally focused therapist Claudio Vargas Silva, licensed marriage and family therapist, and Trisha Kim Walsh, also licensed marriage and family therapist. Welcome back, viewers and listeners, to Thriving Your Love with Trish and Claudio. Thank you for tuning in to an episode of one of two that the discussion and topic will be on the very, very important connection between addiction and attachment. And Claudio, I really do feel that as our world continues to get more benefited from technology, that we're also finding a theme that I'm seeing across the board with all of my clients is addiction and how we are soothing ourselves when we don't have attachment because our world is so fast paced through the benefits of technology that we're not finding a lot of opportunities to do what we often need any kind of relationship is to say, where are the roots of the problem here? Like what starts addiction? What causes us to go away from each other? Where does disconnection even begin? So these are really big topics to discuss, Claudia. We said earlier we'll have to likely do a part one of two. So let's dive in. I'm eager to hear your thoughts about the connection of addiction and attachment.
Yeah, so Trish, I want to tell you about a trip that I made in July. I was going to a city in Brazil, Belém, and the state is Pará. When I was there, I went to a beach. And it was like a beach that was not like from the ocean, but a river. And then there was a city that was close by, like a small town, right? I saw something that I didn't see for a long time. I don't know how it was your childhood, Trisha, but I remember in my childhood that my cousin, who was like another father figure for me, he had a store that was right in front of the main street in a part of Rio de Janeiro. Sometimes at night, we would put like chairs right in front of the store and we would sit. And then people would pass by, would greet us, we would talk to them. So it was such an opportunity to connect, like the family being together, the family connecting to other families and people. A lot of people knew them. So you really felt the power of connection. You were connected to your family, you're connected to your neighbors. It was something special. And this is what I saw in this town in Brazil that I went that was close to Belém. Night I was driving, and when I was driving, I saw people walking on the streets. Can you imagine? Like here, you wouldn't have really people walking on the streets, but it seems the streets were not for the cars, they were for people. So the cars were the ones who needed to be careful because there were kids that were riding their bikes, young couples that were walking, holding hands, and families walking. So you could see that after people finished working, they would go to the street. They wouldn't go inside of their homes to watch the TV or something like that. They were all connecting with each other. And what we see that is the source of a lot of loneliness and a lot of problems that we see is the lack of connection, is loneliness. This is especially hard for children, because their parents are sometimes at work, or if their parents are at home, they are busy doing something. So the kids feel lonely and it's painful. Because it's so painful, they want to numb the pain. And when they try to numb the pain, they get something that they become addicted to. And the problem now here is not this thing that they are addicted true. But what we see is the loneliness, the lack of trust that they can connect to someone and that they are in pain and they need to grab something to numb that pain, to fill the void, and they are going to become addicted to that, Trisha.
Yes, this again comes an essential time, Claudio, in our world when we think about us having an epidemic of not only recently COVID, but we're also acknowledging loneliness. And that my experience, Claudio, and that personal, very sweet story that you've acknowledged is children want more than anything in the world is to be included, is they want to have safety. They want to be loved by their family. They're really just to know a child is to know love, is that there's a loving nature that's just naturally nourishing and nurturing a desire to feel included. And so children are very resilient. They're looking for opportunities to connect, whether it's through friends or activities. They want to learn. What happens when they're feeling rejected? We know this just by thinking of an exercise of what kind of connections were you seeking as a child growing up? I know, Claudio, for me, growing up in Southern California in Orange County, I did a lot of my connection through church and through music as a singer, and that was my part of my community. But if I didn't feel and have that, I do believe I would have felt very lonely. And I also grew up as an only child, so I had a very small nuclear family, and my mom came from another state, my dad came from another country, so they themselves were extremely lonely. So I just think about, Claudio, on average, most caretakers and parents are so consumed and busy with providing for the family that their focus is how do I pay the bills? That often in their mind is the connection kids are going to get from is school. And sometimes going to school can be a place that can be very disconnecting. Think about how there's been a surge and increase of bullying just by social media, that even peers are connecting more, not necessarily through each other, but through how many likes and how many followers they're getting. And I said this earlier, Claudio, is there is an artificiality about what is connection, such as holding a hand, such as spending quality time with your family versus being on a screen and trying to get as many people to follow you, which has its superficiality to that for such a young age where the brain is still developing.
Yes, and what we see is that for children, the most important people in their lives are their parents, right?
Right.
Some parents, they have difficulty connecting to their children, not because of their fault, not because they don't want to, but because sometimes they cannot, because they're too busy, and sometimes they don't know how
Right.
because they themselves couldn't connect to their own parents in their childhood. They didn't learn how to communicate in a way that is empathetic, compassionate, validating. What happens now if the kids don't have other sources to connect? I was talking to someone this week that was telling me that when she wasn't able to connect to their parents, so she would go to other houses of neighbors, friends, and then she would stay there sometimes days in a row, and she was welcomed there, you know? And she felt good about being with those people, and she even forgot her house and her parents. So what we see here is that there was an outlet for her if she couldn't connect to her parents. And we have seen that in the past, it was something that people could do. They could go to their uncle, aunt, they could go to grandma, grandpa, neighbors, friends. So if they couldn't get those needs for connection with their parents, they would go outside and then they would be able to connect. They could go to the streets, they could play on the streets. So there were a lot of possibilities. But we know that the most important of all is parents. And this is something that I have been doing a lot, Trisha, on helping, for example, teenagers, is that I help their parents to connect to each other and then to connect to their children. So we are like fixing the problem in the root, right? We are helping the parents to be that source for their kids. The thing is that right now it's very hard because kids, they don't have the outlets that in previous generations still happens in Brazil, as I said, in that place in Brazil that I went, right? That you could do that. So, and when you said about COVID, and I believe, Trisha, that during COVID, there was another epidemic that was much worse than COVID, which was loneliness. Because we are in a lonely country, most of it, that people are very individualistic. Kids are lonely. Like I was talking to someone a while ago that she told me that in her childhood she would visit her neighbors, she would enter, and didn't have to ask, didn't need her mom or dad to call them, can my daughter go there? No, she would just show up. So you see, like how easy it was to connect, how people were all interconnected. There were not many barriers. There was so much innocence and people believed in everyone. There wasn't all these distrust that we have and fear that we have now, that we have built so many walls to protect. What happens is that during COVID, that was the worst epidemic. And a lot of what we are seeing right now in the news in terms of, crime and shootings and things come from people who really felt so disconnected. And while they were disconnected, they were thinking negative thoughts and thinking that people didn't love them and everyone was against them. And then as a result, we see like what is happening. But in other words, while people were so lonely, they were trying to find something that would numb the pain, something that would replace the people that they couldn't connect to. And those were things that they became addicted to. But it is not that they became addicted to something in particular, is that they created an addictive personality that is rooted in a lack of trust in human connection, a lack of trust in people to be there for them. They need to seek comfort in things. So they are addicted to addiction itself.
Yeah, Claudio, that powerful. It's powerful. I hope our viewers and listeners can just take that in as what was even worse than a virus that was killing millions of people. And let's also acknowledge that there was deep, profound grieving over the loss of everything, like the loss of safety, the loss of connection to see people from all over the world, have access to travel, the access to go to a classroom and learn with other peers. There were a lot of my clients that I worked with in high school that were losing their rite of passage as they were juniors and seniors in high school to go to dances, to connect with their peers on that level, to go through graduation and go through the walking ceremony. So there's just so much loss and there was so much grieving. And when we're going through an experience of grieving, we know what can be really reparative and healing is the power of touch, the power of the oxytocin that we call contact comfort is one of the top reported losses that clients would share with me is receiving a hug, of feeling that contact of a friend, a family member, because sometimes family members in their own house would get COVID and then they couldn't have contact with each other because they'd have to quarantine in their own home. So there is something about this tribal mindset, Claudia, that you were speaking to with your sweet childhood memory about what it's like, regardless if it's coming from a caretaker, and I completely agree with you, is what is most precious is a child having access to their parents. But if you can't have access to your parents, then you want your tribe, your community, your aunts, your uncles, your mentors, your siblings, your teachers, your classmates. And so what happens if we look through that list of our check mark the box and say, no, 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 then what do kids do? They're resourceful. They go to their video gaming, their computer gaming, they go to their social media. And we know part of social media is the marketing, the lure, to say, I want to keep you on longer because you will consume more. So there is a danger that we are also experiencing when the addiction is fed into kind of a machine is we will respond to your loneliness. And it's a bit tricky, right? Because there's not just social media is also, it has its benefits because it does give you access to people from all over the world potentially. So there is the balance of how much is too much to consume. And that's really a question that a lot of parents have worked with me in family therapy is I do want my child to have connections, but sometimes I'm not able to monitor how long it is okay for them to be on their phone. And that has been another topic is the fact that we have these incredible devices that give us access to the world, but we're spending more and more time on touching these devices than we are being able to touch each other in person. And what I mean by that is being able to contact each other, to be physically present with each other, because we are in a society that doesn't have large community unless you're fortunate to come from a larger communities or you're spiritually oriented is addiction forms when you're isolated and we are finding ourselves with the benefit and use of technology to become more and more isolated with not a lot of solutions. Because what happens with addiction, Claudio, and I think that's kind of leading to our second part of our discussion is we look at addiction as a problem to be solved and we punish it, we criticize it, we shame it, we blame the child, the teenager, the partner, but we really don't look underneath of what is happening that even causes the addiction, which is what you said so beautifully is the epidemic of loneliness.
And also, like for parents, it's what they can do to connect to the child. Because, as you said, if they shame, if they blame, if they criticize, if they try to show authority, if they punish, they are going to create more distance, more loneliness. So they don't realize that they actually push the child more towards the addiction. As I see that parents, they feel really disappointed when they are trying to help the child, they are trying to get the child to get out of the addiction, but they become very controlling, they become very harsh, and they become like disappointed because they think, well, I'm a parent, my child should listen to me, should obey me, but my child doesn't. So it's so hard for a parent in that case to accept not having that authority and the child resisting to them. So they become angrier, they push further, they become harder, and they have a competition with the child. What is so important for parents, for couples also, is how they can find the way to connect with the child and a couple to connect to each other in a way that the other person will want to come close. Because the way that we sometimes do, we can push more that person towards the addiction instead of bringing closer, right? And then, so like, for example, when I work with parents, I'm helping them to develop a communication that is going to be empathetic, is going to be validating, is going to be compassionate. When I help with couples and I'm trying to help the addicted person to see the lack of trust in a human being, to connect with their partner where the fear is, and to work on that fear, to help that other partner to be more understanding, more empathetic, so that the addicted partner feels more trust, feels safer to come close and abandon the addiction. But we want to invite our listeners to our next podcast when we will talk more about what we can do to overcome addiction, what we can do to bring a child closer, an addicted partner closer, right?
Right, Claudia. Yeah, I'm thankful to you for bringing this topic. It's so necessary for us to discuss it. And I really like that we're closing in this part 1 of 2 about the power of empathy, is to say that there is good news. We do have solutions here to this, right, Claudio? So part 2 will really discuss that, I think, for viewers and listeners that are on the edge of their seat wanting more is stay tuned. We'll have a part 2 and we'll really get into this, into speaking of what do you do when you realize that addiction is affecting your family? Because there's good news. It can get better. Recovery is possible. Change is possible. It is a process, and we have a lot of thoughts and recommendations at our next podcast. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. We hope you'll join us soon again for our next episode of Thriving Your Love.